So I'm Daniel, and currently I'm a third year physics student. I'm currently doing my third year away in France for Erasmus, but and then I'll be doing sort of another fourth year. But so today I just wanted to speak about a little bit my own sort of understanding about sort of mental health, a little about my sort of history and how much I've sort of changed and how much my perspective has changed. But also, as I'm part of the LGBT community, I wanted to speak a bit about how this can sort of help people, and actually just talking about my own experience and how much this would have helped me when I was younger. And hopefully that actually in the future, we can sort of use this sort of understanding to help other young LGBT people. I mean, young or old, it doesn't really matter, all the same. So when I was younger, I'd say just before university, I really struggled with anxiety. This sort of manifested in different ways, from sort of panic attacks to those feelings where you just don't want to get up in the morning. And they really sort of, my sort of feelings around sort of anxiety sort of peaked in sort of odd places. For example, I had a part-time job, and ideally, like, it was such an ideal place to work because the people were lovely and it was really fun. Yet every time I went, I had this crushing feeling, and I would have panic attacks. So that was sort of when it really sort of struck home for me that actually there was something kind of going on. Because before, I think a lot of people don't realize their moods changed, because it can be a very kind of a slow process, and actually it's just over time you feel sort of worse and worse. But actually there are little things that actually make you realize that there's something going on, whether it's a friend or family that sort of mention it, or whether you notice it yourself. And these sorts of feelings of anxiety and stuff had been going back for many, many years. And sort of over my sort of childhood, I had a lot of sort of feelings of anxiety, and a lot of that centered around actually being LGBT. And of course, back then, I didn't really realize that's where it was coming from. And it's only looking back that actually I can sort of say, yes, no, it was because of that, or partially because of that. And I think for a lot of young people, that sort of adolescent time of your life is incredibly important. And there's a lot of pressure, whether it's from yourself or from sort of schools, from family, sort of wherever, to sort of act in a certain way, to fit into society in a certain way. And for anyone who steps outside of that, or what we think of those expectations, even if no one directly says it, that there are these expectations, we kind of create it in our heads. So if you step outside of that, we have all these sorts of mental repercussions that are really, really profound. So for example, for me, I knew I was gay from maybe around sort of year 7 to year 8. And that's sort of quite early for a lot of people. But really, looking back, I kind of always knew, but I wasn't able to actually sort of put my finger on what was different. But during that period, from all the way from sort of year 6 to year 8, as I was starting to kind of understand sort of my identity, and actually sort of being gay, it was really, really difficult, just because even though there was some sort of representation in the media, it wasn't much, and it was very much of a certain type. And there was still a lot of association between something being gay to something being bad, or there's a lot of shame involved, or being LGBT means you're lesser than people who are heterosexual or cisgender. So cisgendered is when your biological sex is the same as your sort of your identity. And so transgendered is when there's a sort of dissonance between the two. So there was, and no one in my family, everyone in my family was, no one was sort of homophobic or anything like that. So in my head, I was very confused of why I felt so much shame and why I felt so awful, because really there was nothing directly saying to me that actually this is a bad thing, this is wrong. The only things I can think about was, I know, children in school just sort of being mean. And even then, that has a big effect on you, because it's almost like what's in your head back then, the ideas of saying, I feel shameful, I feel bad about this, is affirmed by your peers. So if you have those thoughts of thinking that you're lesser, and then someone else comes along and say, yes, you are, then you think that's going to be true because there's evidence for that. So I came out when I was in GCSE year. So that was when I was 16 or 15, really. So I wasn't out during that period of year 7 and year 8. And that was difficult because I would hear a lot of these comments, and I wouldn't be able to do anything about it, just because if I stood up, then people would obviously know, and then people would tease me, and then I had all these sorts of repercussions in my head going on. Would my family be okay with it? Would they reject me? Would I had friends? How would my life change because of this? So I built this massive story up over really 5+ years. So from all the way from year 6 all the way up to year 11. So that's a long, long time. And if we think about our favorite books and our favorite series, when with these TV shows goes on for a decade or so, you get so attached to these characters and so attached to these story arcs. And I don't think we necessarily think about our own story arcs and our own stories that we tell ourselves. And there was this awful story that I was telling myself, which was that I was lesser, and that's being gay, I was X, Y, and Z. And I never questioned this, just because I knew that it was my reality, it was part of my identity. So if I was to change that, then who would I be without it? So it was incredibly difficult to start to let go of that. And that started happening when I was able to talk to maybe a few friends and actually see that, okay, their reaction was actually pretty good. And that was really just trying to force myself into the deep end. And then when I was in year 11, I finally came out, and immediately there was a big weight lifted, but still there are so many residual feelings left behind. And it's something where if you've had that weight on your shoulder for so long, you can't just shift it immediately. There's going to be so much time that you need to process what's been going on. And I think as I got older, so maybe first year of university, I was still looking back and I was still reflecting upon the different stories that I told myself in the past. And I say telling myself stories, even though because feels very, very real. And saying it's a story almost makes it sound unjustified or not valid. It completely is. When I say story, it's more about how we shape our identity. What do we tell ourselves that we don't tell ourselves on purpose or deliberately, but that it's just there in our heads. They're the thoughts that we have about ourselves, essentially. So when I got to university, I didn't think there was anything left. I thought I'd resolved all my past issues and I did all that. Then obviously there was something coming. There's obviously going to be something that came along, and I was like, whoa, okay. No, I still got a lot of stuff left that I need to have a look at and tend to. And that was perfectly fine. And the thing that really changed between A-levels and university, so I had similar experiences in terms of during A-levels, I had a lot of stuff come back up, and I couldn't deal with it. That's when I started spiraling again, I think. But then when it came to university and I had that same experience, I was able to deal with it a lot better. And the thing that changed was this shift in understanding. So back before A-levels, it was very much that these feelings I had, they were me. So I was my feelings and I was my circumstance. So me feeling anxious and feeling depressed, therefore I was anxious and depressed. So that was really difficult because I didn't, again, question those feelings at all. I felt them come back up, and I remember feeling them back when I was really young, and I was really scared that I was going to get sucked back into that black hole. And there was so much fear of the anxiety and so much fear of the depressive episodes that's just it was really this spiral, this cycle that I was going through, where I was getting more anxious about the anxiety than actually the initial anxiety. I think so many people feel like that about no matter what, really. So going into university, I had this shift where actually I was able to understand that I am not my circumstance. It may feel like it at times, and it may be 100% convincing, but fundamentally we're not our circumstance. We are sort of these external beings to it, and we experience it. We have these thoughts that sort of come in and out, these feelings that come and go, but we're still going to be external to that. And I think that had a massive, massive change to me, because it was no longer that I was anxiety and I was depression. It was, I'm feeling these thoughts of anxiety and I'm feeling these thoughts of sort of depressive episodes. But I know that I will be able to come out of that. And even when I was in the center of those feelings and I saw no way out, there was still this a little bit at the back of my head that I was able to have faith in myself. And I was able to know that actually, okay, I've gone through this before and I will come out of it. And in the future, I will probably go through something like that again. And I'll come out of that. I mean, there's this big analogy about weather and how sort of we have the blue sky behind all the clouds, and this sort of blue sky being our sort of place of well-being, our place of tranquility, or whatever you want to call it, our feeling of home. And that we have all the clouds and everything, all the sort of that shit that sort of gets in the way of it. Those are all our feelings and our thoughts and our stories that we tell ourselves, for good or for worse. But having that realization that actually there is something more to it, that actually it is possible to have that sort of transition, the transiency, that's not a word, something, making up words again, that actually I can still have that place behind all the shit that I'm feeling. And that actually that place of well-being can never leave me. It can get covered and it can get masked, but fundamentally knowing that I am okay, I am not broken, was so, so powerful, because really it changed for me is saying that I don't need to be fixed. I don't need to fix myself or these feelings that I have. It's all natural, and I shouldn't be fighting them so relentlessly as I had in the past. And as soon as I stopped fighting with it, actually those episodes just passed a lot quicker. Because before I thought you had to always be feeling kind of this sort of elated and always had to be feeling this sort of really happy, because that's how we sort of are taught to be, really. And it's a good thing to be taught that we should have aimed for happiness. But what's not taught is that it's okay to be feeling crap, and it's okay to have these sort of negative feelings. There's no such thing as good feelings and bad feelings. They're just feelings. Because if we didn't have one, then we wouldn't have the other. Like, it's impossible to feel happiness without sadness. It's a contrast that we need. So that was really, really fundamental for me. And one of the sort of examples that I give about that, about how my sort of thinking has changed, is actually, it seem really, really small, but for me, it was really big. It was about going to the gym, and it was about my own sort of self-image. Within the LGBT sort of community, eating disorders and body image sort of dysmorphia are incredibly, incredibly high. So there are estimates that 5% of 5% of men are gay or bi. And when it comes to eating disorders, around 42% of males with eating disorders are gay or bi. So that's a massive, massive proportion. So there are so many reasons because of the sort of eating disorders, because within the gay community, whether that's sort of a cultural thing, how you see in the media all these sorts of gay men and or sort of LGBT people who are sort of, they look a certain way. You have Instagram where these sort of models that look amazing, you kind of want to be like them. You have all this sort of discrimination, so you maybe want to look the best so you can kind of mask how you feel inside. So many reasons. So, and I was fortunate enough never to have the extreme sort of feelings of that. But there was always something there sort of nagging me, saying like, oh, you should be sort of going to the gym more. You should be looking like this. You should put on more weight. So during A-levels, I started going to the gym, and I wasn't really aware of those feelings, but I knew that they were sort of somewhere still there. And then at university, I still had that pressure, felt like it. And I think it was only until second year that actually I was just in the gym and I was just thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, do I enjoy it? I started questioning, thinking that why should I kind of be the judge of what is sort of attractive or not? Or why do I even want to look a certain way or be deemed sort of attractive? Like, what's the point of it? And I caught myself, and it was this weird moment, because I remember I was in a gym and I saw everyone sort of, all these sort of builders and everyone sort of looking amazing. And then I almost just started laughing, because it was just, it almost felt like a circus in a way, that all these people who looked sort of amazing and whatever, they probably had the exact same thoughts as me. And it was so funny, just because I was always comparing myself to them, and then they're probably comparing themselves to someone like even more, deemed more attractive or more sort of muscular or whatever. And you get this thing where actually we're all looking for perfection, but then no one's told us that perfection doesn't exist. So we're all chasing after this mirage. And it was just it was so funny, because I had this image of everyone's just sort of running towards this goal. Or imagine so these, the sort of dogs with like this little helmet with like a treat at the end. We're all running towards that, but it's impossible to get to because it doesn't exist. So I had this sort of massive change, that actually, what's the point of trying to chase this sort of perfect image in my head? Because I knew that even if I got to sort of my desired weight or whatever, I would still have those feelings, and that wouldn't change. So I had this massive transformation. And actually I kept going to the gym because I actually liked it, because I liked sort of feeling energetic, and I liked the kind of the adrenaline that you feel and all the good feelings that come with that. And it was very much less often that I would come out the gym feeling kind of really, really bad, and feeling kind of ashamed of myself that I wasn't able to do this or like pull this weight. So whereas I came out to the gym, if I had a really bad session, I was just like, meh, it's all right. At least I went. Or if I don't go one day, like I haven't been for a while, I'm okay with that. Because I know that in the future, if I want to do it again, I can. And that's such a weight off my shoulder, because it's really, in a small way, it's just sort of allowed me that extra bit of freedom. So it was that story that I told myself about, if I don't go to the gym, I would be desirable, I would be sort of, people wouldn't sort of talk to me, all these sorts of things. And then because of that, I would feel stressed. I would feel anxious about going to the gym. I'd be anxious about not going to the gym. I'd be anxious about going to the gym. So there was no way I could win that. But now, because I've questioned myself on it, I've broken that story. I'm not believing it anymore. Now my relationship with sort of my image, my sort of my body, my going to the gym has completely changed. And now I feel so much more in control. Not in control, I would say, actually, that's a bad word. But I would say more at one with that part of myself, which is, I think, a very positive thing. So these stories, so whether it's sort of the gym, whatever, eating, anything like that sort of people feel, they're, to some sort of extent, they're the stories, like whether it's it could be anything really that we tell ourselves. It is possible to sort of break out of that, and it's difficult because I don't want to get to the point where I say that, oh no, it's all in your head and it's all kind of this, because that sounds awful, and I've been on the receiving end of that, in a sense of like, people have made it seem like, oh, I can just snap out of it. That's the worst thing to hear. And I think it's about, for me at least, it was about sort of believing what I told myself. And by no longer believing it, and it wasn't something that I chose to do, it wasn't just suddenly I woke up and being like, oh, I'm not going to believe I'm anxious anymore. And then suddenly, wow, I'm not anxious anymore. I mean, if we all had that power, then, I mean, that'd be amazing, but that's not how the human condition works. And like, I still have those moments where I'm feeling kind of crappy. I'm feeling, I go to the gym and I'm feeling kind of anxious, but it just means that the frequency of it, or the power that it has over me, has sort of depleted in a way, which is, yeah, really, really good. And I think that if we do start sort of teaching younger gay people about this, in terms of questioning the stories that you tell yourself, and that could be regarding anything. So it could be about sort of body image, it could be about what sort of being gay means, whether being gay means that you have to be sort of I don't know, so stereotype sort of in the media that you have to be sort of the best friend of a girl, that, and you have to love shopping, and you have to all this sort of crap. Because again, when I was younger, that's what I kind of believed, because that's what I saw. So if we're teaching people that you can actually, you're allowed to question those beliefs, like what are the stories that you tell yourself that you no longer need to believe, having that kind of profound sort of statement allows you to actually allows you to question your identity, or question what you think you are, because you can choose to hold on to those bits which are important for you, like the bits of your identity that that make you who you are, and then the other parts you can start to, over time, actually maybe question those, and then actually see that, okay, you're not serving me anymore, like I'm kind of done with you in a way. Having that kind of breakup conversation with a part of you, and it takes time, and for some things it's, you have this insight and then you can wake up the next morning and then you can feel free of it, and other times it takes a lot of work. I mean, it took me kind of to how many years to actually sort of break free of that, but for every person it's sort of different. And I think having that, trying to take that pressure off in a way, saying that just because I know I see my friend over here and they're really confident in who they are, or at least I think they're confident in who they are. Yeah, that's a different story, but it's okay to kind of go at your own pace, and actually it's okay to not meet those expectations that you put on yourself. I mean, I think that some expectation can be good because it gives you some focus, but otherwise it can be a very negative thing. Like I know I feel I did feel sometimes that, oh, I wish I could have had this understanding earlier, so I could have enjoyed my sort of teenage years more. Or, oh, how are there some people who were already out back then and they were really confident, and I know I had these sort of pangs of regret in a way. So I had this kind of expectation, but actually it's okay. Like I can't go back into the past, and would I want to really? Because everything that kind of happened makes me who I am now, and I'm happy with where I am. So the only thing I can do is sort of strive forwards, and to keep sort of questioning those parts of myself, and to kind of keep an open mind in a way, which I think is sort of really important. So I was going to sort of talk about sort of things that would have helped me when I was younger, even when I wasn't sort of out, because it's always difficult to have that conversation with someone when they're sort of not out. Even if I know there are lots of people who sort of knew that I was sort of gay before I came out, but if anyone had that conversation with me, sort of saying like, "Oh, it's okay, like you can come out, whatever," I would have completely freaked. But it's just what would have really helped me, I think, is having these conversations about our identity, about kind of what it means to us, about again, so going back to like the stories that we sort of tell ourselves, and actually just having more vulnerability in the world, I think, and having people that we look up to, whether those are parents, whether those are teachers, our sort of older friends, or anyone that we kind of are close to and that we love, having a more open conversation about sort of our insecurities or our vulnerabilities in a way which is constructive, in a way which takes the fear out of it. So we're no longer kind of afraid of actually sort of opening that side of ourselves up to others or to ourselves, and taking the taboo away from it. And I think that I don't know, maybe if they were, and it's always difficult to kind of say like, oh, if it'd been like this when I was younger, then maybe I would have sort of skipped all that sort of anxiety, but it's impossible to say. And it's kind of pointless in a way, kind of trying to mull too much about it. But I think definitely having those open conversations about sort of understanding that we're not our thoughts, and that as much as that we feel like we are, as much as we're kind of caught up in it, that actually it will pass. It might take a while, and we have those moments where we think we're okay, we're happy, we're done with it, and then suddenly they come crashing back. That's fine. It's part of our human condition. Like we are living in a human experience, and that is a fundamentally kind of a neutral experience. Like we're going to have those sort of high moments, we're going to have those sort of low moments on our heads, but we will always have those things. So kind of overall, we're not going to be living this kind of two-dimensional kind of emotional experience in a way. And I lost my train of thought a little bit, but so in physics, we say that sort of everything's built on these sort of laws of physics. We have sort of Newton's laws of gravitation, we have quantum mechanics, we have all these sorts of great bits of physics. All of those things are fundamentally neutral in a sense. So those are neither good or bad. We can't say that, oh, Newton's laws of physics is giving me anxiety, or we can't say like, I know quantum mechanics is fundamentally good or whatever. They are what they are. So if you could then make a next step of logic and say that everything in the universe is based on those laws of physics. So then we go to the next step, which is saying that, okay, so if everything is based on those laws of physics, and if those laws of physics are fundamentally neutral, so they have no emotional kind of value, then why do we put value on, why do we feel emotional about things? So before, it could be that we say that, oh no, this person is talking bad stuff about me, I'm really angry at them, I'm going to hit them. So before, we think that, okay, they're causing me to feel angry, they're making me punch them. Whereas now, because if everything in the universe is neutral fundamentally because of the laws of physics, then it's no longer they're making me feel angry, therefore I'm going to punch them. It's that I'm having angry thoughts about this. Then because of those angry thoughts, I'm going to believe those thoughts and I'm going to punch them because I feel like that's the most appropriate result. So there's a slight kind of difference between the two. So the first is, it's about the causality, the cause and effect. So before, it's this event causes me to feel this, or causes me to respond in a certain way. So whereas now we're saying that actually I'm having thoughts about this event, and therefore I'm going to act in a certain way. So we call it kind of the sort of inside out sort of understanding in a sense. So it's a sense of that we're taking more ownership, I guess, of our actions and of our thoughts, because really at a sort of fundamental level, because if everything is neutral, you can say like, how can things give us an emotional sort of response then? Because if something really awful happens to me, then of course I'm going to feel kind of a certain way. And it's not saying that that's not the case, like not at all. It's saying that actually our feelings and our thoughts, they originate from inside ourselves, rather than sort of almost transferring from something else into us. So for me, in terms of like a physics level, that sort of makes sense logically. And I know other people have different sort of opinions, and that they have different sort of ways of understanding it. But for me, that sort of feels quite logical, because I know you could have a presentation where you go up and then you feel like it went really, really awful. And then you feel like you could have missed out loads of stuff, and then you feel really kind of shitty at the end. But then someone could come up to you afterwards and say like, that was so insightful, you were really, really awesome. And you think, was that the same event? You kind of think maybe you got lost in a parallel universe or something. because it was the same event, obviously, but the two outcomes of that were completely different. So one was you feeling kind of anxious and the other person was feeling kind of really great about it. So the question is, who is right here? Well, neither of them, and also both of them, because the event was the same. So if we say the event was kind of a neutral thing, so you can't, so that event is fundamentally neutral, intrinsically neutral, then therefore the experience must come from within ourselves. So the experience of it being making you feel anxious, and the experience of the other person having an insight and feeling kind of great about it has to originate within those people. And then that causes a lot of sort of consequences. So if we look at why there is so much conflict between people, is because we fundamentally can't understand where the other person is coming from. We feel like they're living in complete different realities. And that can range from just sort of having a disagreement about something really small to sort of massive things that involve sort of politics and involve sort of business, and these massive sort of conflicts. But fundamentally, it's because we're all disagreeing upon what we're viewing, essentially, and the sort of emotions that come with that. So I wouldn't be able to understand why the other person in that presentation thought it was a great or something if I thought it was so crap. Like, didn't you see it right? Like, weren't you listening? I could come to all these sort of conclusions saying like, well, obviously they were sleeping during that, so I'm going to feel really mad about it. Whereas actually, they're doing the exact same thing. It's just they've got something completely different out of it. And I might not agree what they're observing, but I can agree that they're seeing something different in a way. In a way, it's taking a positive note on the agree to disagree in a way, in like a really nice sense in terms of, okay, I may not see where you're coming from, but I understand that actually what you're seeing from this, like your sort of your reality is going to be different to mine, and that's you can't help that. So there's going to be a lot less sort of conflict in the sense of people aren't going to get mad at each other in a sense, just because, or there's going to be less frustration, I guess, which I think that's quite kind of interesting. Then I suppose sort of empathy then would be the ability to actually see someone else's reality, see the filters that they put on their own vision, in a sense, or the way that they view the world. Doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with them, but it means that you can kind of start to see maybe where they're coming from, or have that kind of compassion in a way. And I think that's sort of interesting, especially when it comes to, I guess, so being maybe sort of LGBT in a sense of, well, if you have sort of two LGBT people and they have very, very similar experiences, I know, say we take two people and they go through almost identical experiences, those two people can have complete different sort of views on what being gay means to them or being LGBT means to them. One person can be proud and they can want to sort of talk about it, and they can be out and they can be confident. And the other person might still be sort of closeted. They might have still a lot of shame, and sort of all these sort of negative connotations with it. And so essentially then you kind of start to question, well, is being gay causing those things? Like, is it the actual sort of the fact that either the genetic or the environmental or whatever, is that causing you directly to feel that way? Well, I would argue no, and that might seem quite controversial, but because if it was that case, then everyone who was gay, everyone who was LGBT would feel the exact same way. They would all feel awful, although they'd all feel great. So fundamentally, so at a very, very fundamental level, like being LGBT doesn't cause for those feelings. But what comes with that then is how we interpret it, and how we interpret sort of the world around us. Like, I've got a few friends who they've had things said to them, like sort of slurs and stuff, like in the street, or they've been sort of assaulted. And I've seen people who their reaction have been, well, doesn't really kind of like, they've got their own issues, so I'm not going to take it personally. To then other people who think like, oh, if they're saying all this about me, the world's scary. Like I don't want to sort of go out. I might sort of not say I'm gay anymore, all this stuff. So two completely sort of different reactions to kind of similar events. Because I know if we're talking about this sort of discrimination, it's like, well, the maybe it won't go as far as discrimination, but then the let's say slurs and all that sort of aggression. To me personally, that's none of my business what they think about me, because I know kind of who I am and I know my identity, and the stuff that they're saying about me, whether that's sort of being slurs about being gay, whatever, that's none of my business. Like they can sort of think what they want, and sure, ideally it would really they should be saying that stuff, and it has sort of awful effects on people. It can do, but for me, like that's their business in a way. I think that a lot of young people, especially when I was younger, when I'd hear that stuff, I would really take it on, and I would sort of add it as extra baggage, because again, it was that reaffirmation that if they're calling me this word, then I am this word. Like I am this sort of connotation. I am awful. I am shameful. I should deserve to, I know, go to hell or whatever. But now I've realized that, yeah, what they say doesn't have to, it doesn't mean anything to me. Like it fundamentally, like again, if we're going back to the physicsy side, fundamentally all they're doing is that they're saying some words which are vibrations in air, which I'm picking up in my head, and I'm causing these connotations to. And even though some of these sort of words they're really awful and they have these sort of bad connotations, they're still these sort of they're still the connotations which I am sort of processing in my head and I'm believing, in a sense. Because really, if someone says something kind of awful about you, and it can be sort of no matter what, it doesn't have to be exclusively LGBT. I know, say if I'm saying to a girl like, oh yeah, you should be kind of this weight, or you should be looking like this, like to someone that could be some awful thing to say, and that could really, really haunt them. Then to other people, it could just be like, well, that's none of your business. Like, well, they could have no meaning to that. So in a way, kind of the words that people say kind of have no intrinsic value. It's kind of interesting to think about, because, and I know it sounds quite sort of controversial to some people, because we're so used to the cause and effect. We're so used to, if someone says something kind of homophobic to me, then I should react in a certain way and I should take it personally. And I know people.
I liked what you said about when people say that, it's just the words that they say are just a vibration. They're just energy, right? That's coming into you. Excuse me. And thought, and our thoughts are just vibrations too, aren't they? It's the same thing. They're just energy too. They're not real as such.
Yeah, but they're I always get very kind of cautious with the sort of energy and vibration, that kind of stuff. But essentially, it's all from we're all producing it from ourselves. Like we're producing it from our own brain in a way, and we have our subconscious side and we have our unconscious side, and we're constantly picking up sort of information. So we're able to sort of create all these sorts of thoughts and stuff in our heads. So a new thought, for me, I see it as a purely sort of biological kind of process in my head in a way. I'm very kind of matter of fact in that way. But I do see it in terms of either we've picked up sort of some random things along the way in terms of from our environment, and then so randomly we have the right combination of things triggers something else which sort of delivers a new thought, or but it's a very sort of gray area. And again, sort of not sort of a neurologist or anything, but
so even so, the stories, what I'm hearing you saying is that the stories that we tell ourselves are basically not true. You know, that we're all telling ourselves stories all the time, and that once you see that that's though they're just stories. It makes a big difference that you don't have to change that. But I'm just interested also that you said, like, for example, you said sometimes it changes really quickly and sometimes it can be really hard. And those are just stories too, aren't they?
Yeah. And I guess so when you get sort of down to it, it's like, it's because it's all sort of story. It's all our sort of own creation, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was sort of trying to get to is just saying that, like, I had those sort of epiphanies where I was sort of standing there in the gym and I just started laughing. And then there's sort of certain things where actually it can take a while almost to become consciously aware that they're stories in a way. Like some stuff I never sort of questioned because it was always there. It's like if you've lived, I know, say in the same house for years and years and years since you were a child, you might have not realized that actually there was that feature on the wall or something. And then suddenly like thinking, oh, I didn't realize that was there. I think sometimes it can kind of take you by surprise in a way. But I think once you kind of have that almost consciousness about it, then it really sort of almost just that fact of being aware of it can have so much power, because then it gives you the more of the freedom, I guess, to start sort of probing that, and then actually sort of maybe thinking about, well, is this true or not? Like, is this actually, is this fundamentally kind of me? Or because really, like, there's a quotation which I love, which is, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. I think quite fitting for talk on LGBT. But so that's from RuPaul. And I think that's so true in the sense of, who are we really? Like, who is our identity? I could say that, oh, I'm Dan, like I said in the intro, I'm Dan and I'm third year of university. That's not who I am, that's what I'm doing. And then you go sort of step below that, and then you could say, okay, who am I? And then you can go sort of so much deeper to actually realizing, oh, who I am is very actually abstract. And that all the stuff that we put on top of it is almost our drag in a way, our kind of human drag. And that's what we call our identity. But actually, identity is incredibly fluid. Like it's almost just like air in a way, or smoke. The more we kind of try to sort of grab onto it or try to actually create this sort of physical form of it, the more it disappears. And I guess if our identity is built up of all the stories that we say to ourselves, that actually when we start sort of looking deeper into it, looking deeper into our identity, then we realize how sort of transparent really it is and how much we can't physically touch it in a sense.
And the other thing I loved was when you were talking about that the more you fought your thoughts and your feelings, when you thought you shouldn't have them and you tried to change them and so on, the worse it got. And when you just like noticed, oh, that's the thought and that's the feeling and that's it, you know, and that's the feelings coming from that, this feeling is coming from that thought, and not try and do anything about it, it just calmed down and disappeared or changed on its own. That was really,
It's like, what's the best way to settle a snow globe? I mean, just leave it be. To some extent, like that's, I think, can be the best sort of solution in a way, is almost doing nothing. And it's sort of, it can be sort of quite hard to say that, because we have that natural reaction of saying, if we're feeling anxious, then we need to be doing something proactive to solve that, because we see it as a problem and we want to solve that problem. So having that sort of paradigm shift of saying that it isn't a problem and it's okay just to leave it be, just to sort of don't touch it in a way, or just sort of not aggravating it. And again, like there's so many moments where this isn't saying that like I never feel anxiety or anything, because I know if I said that, then I mean I'd be lying. But I still have those sort of moments, but those moments are a lot shorter for me, because again, it's physically having those thoughts which are passing by, rather than me sort of having those feelings and thoughts sort of come into my head, and actually almost me clinging onto it in a sense of I'm trying so hard to sort of fight it off that I'm accidentally holding onto it. And that kind of act of letting go has sort of allowed me to actually just shorten those periods of that discomfort. I think maybe the idea of letting go, we're able to do that a lot more when we're able to actually see those thoughts, or not see them physically, obviously, but see them in terms of see them in our heads and actually be able to identify what they are, and almost separating the idea that they are thoughts from our identity. So it's a lot easier to sort of shift something which isn't fundamentally part of ourselves, because if you thought that anxiety was part of your identity, it seemed a lot harder to live a life without it. Oh, your mute's off. No, your mute's on.
Put it on, thanks. Also, what I noticed was that you don't seem to be afraid of your feelings anymore. So you're not afraid of being anxious, or you're not afraid of being whatever mood you get now, which sort of makes sense, because like, what sort of videos do you watch? What sort of, and I don't just mean you, but I mean other people. What if you think about what sort of videos do I watch? What sort of films do I watch when I go to the cinema and so on? Nearly always we go to see scary films, or we go to see films that make us feel really emotional. We actually pay to have those feelings, and it's okay to we don't think it's odd, or we don't think, oh, I shouldn't be having those feelings. And we actually go and pay to have those feelings. But why not just enjoy them in your, it's only because we've had these stories, oh, we shouldn't be feeling this and we shouldn't be feeling that. And once you stop being afraid of having those feelings and just like, okay, so I'm having that feeling at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is what I see you doing now. You're, okay, so I'm having that feeling.
Yeah. And there was a weird moment where I think it was in second or first year exams, and I was feeling a bit anxious, and I actually kind of enjoyed the feeling in a way, because it was the weirdest thing, because it was such a sort of dissonant feeling. It was such a weird sort of thing, because I felt like I should be fearing that fearing that feeling, but instead I was actually just like, oh, I had this sort of feeling, sort of that butterfly inside me, all those sorts of really that strong sort of anxiety. But actually, rather than taking a negative spin on it, I was just like, okay, I see you. And actually, I'm not going to react on you. I'm just going to let you kind of mull there for a bit. I'm going to kind of it almost felt like a bit of a psychological experiment. I was able to kind of dissect it in a way, in sort of as an emotion. And that was really, really interesting, because it felt almost like, I don't know, think about sort of the boogie monster or something. You see kind of a shadow in your room and you're terrified of it. And actually suddenly you shine the torch on it and it's just a shadow of a mouse, or a shadow of, I don't know, your dressing up gown or something. And it felt very much like that, actually, something that I built up in my head as being such a sort of crippling thing, such a awful thing to feel. I actually saw it for what it was, which was, it was just something that would leave if I just sort of allowed it to, in a way.
I love that idea of experimenting with it too. I mean, that's something else people could do too. Is like, just experiment with what happens if you just leave a feeling, or you just notice, I've got this feeling. Just experiment with what happens if you just don't do anything about it and don't react to it all the time. Yeah.
Or like, if you're feeling like that, then, and with experimentation, it's almost just try and really feel it, rather than sort of trying to numb it. Try actually just really feel it. So getting almost just light some candles, get some like, I don't know, nice bath or something, and then just like sit down and actually just think like, okay, I'm feeling kind of a bit shit right now. Let's feel it, because that's awesome that we're able to feel. Like, that's so awesome. Like, we're the only beings that we know of, so in the whole universe, that can do it. Like, rocks can't do it. I know all the sort of stars in space, that they can't do the same thing that we're doing. So why don't we just try and maybe enjoy it, or maybe not as far as that, but appreciate it in a way, because that's what makes us human, and we should celebrate that, not as a sort of taboo thing that we're feeling. It's not weakness, and it's not strength. It's neutral. Like the emotions that I feel, like I see them as more neutral things. So when I'm happy, I know that eventually that will pass, and then I might feel a bit shitty, and vice versa. I mean, it's like that sort of quotation, which is, I know it's very cliche, but it's like, this too shall pass. Like, no matter what you're feeling, it will change eventually.
It will, but you might as well enjoy what you're feeling at the time. There's no point in waiting for the future, is there? You might as well enjoy it. I love that, experimenting with sitting there and seeing, well, what happens if I just really get into this?
Yeah. It's almost giving you that sort of satisfaction. And I think that's such a unusual thing to maybe hear, of we should be sort of enjoying all types of emotions, or trying to actually really feel them. So I know a lot of advice is for saying, like, if you're feeling kind of a certain way, then you should do something to mask it, whether that's sort of it can lead to unhealthy behavior, such as like sort of binge eating, and or excessive going to the gym, or doing sort of X, Y, and Z. That's all to kind of cover up, in a way, our emotions. Whereas if we started being less afraid of them, and started, again, appreciating, because I see appreciating as being a very, very sort of neutral act, because it's sort of almost being thankful in a way, to all our emotions, and seeing almost as they sort of come in, I think, saying like, okay, I see you, and I thank you for being here, but now shoo. And or you could let it sit there for a bit. It could stay like that for a while. And I know sometimes it's frustrating, because you're thinking like, oh, why aren't you leaving now? You're meant to be sort of transient. Like, come on. But again, it takes its time. Like, it can be there for as long as it serves, in a way. But I think knowing that it's transient will lead to, eventually at some point it will, and it takes away the stress, I guess.
Yeah, and like you said before, sometimes the more you try and make it go away, the more you're starting to think about it, and you're adding more thought to it, and the more it's going to stay. So just welcoming it, and it's worth experimenting with that. Yeah.
And I know that a lot of sort of the feelings of stress and anxiety, like, they're about certain things going on sort of in our life that so potentially have negative consequences. So just take an example with me with exams and stuff. So on my Erasmus year, I've found it really, really tough at university, just because I'm studying physics and French, and it's just a whole nother level that I was kind of anticipating, but not to this level. And I was really, really worried about my exams, and that maybe my grades wouldn't be good enough to do a master's. And I was getting really carried away with my thinking, in terms of, if I don't do well in these exams, they're not going to let me do a master's. Therefore, I'm not going to get a job. Therefore, blah 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 blah. But I've been able to kind of see through my sort of periods of clarity that actually, if it comes to that, then I'll deal with it. And an exam, if I fail an exam, then it's an exam. It's just an exam. Doesn't validate me. Doesn't say anything about me. It's just an exam, and whatever consequences, good or bad, that happen from it, when it comes up, I can deal with it. No matter what happens, no matter what results, I have my physical and mental health, and that's all I need, really, for me.
And whatever even if we think it's bad now, coming from having spent a lot more years in life than you have, that sometimes, we think, oh, I've got to do this, and it's got to be that way, and it'll be bad if it's not that way. And actually, it turns out to be much better when whatever we thought was going to be the disaster, when that happens, and I don't pass that exam, or I don't get this, or whatever. That there are lots more things that we haven't even thought about or imagined that could happen, that could be even better. So I know it doesn't seem like that at the time. It's
no. Yeah, I totally see that. And like a mistake is only a mistake in that moment. Like it could be the best decision of your life,
Yeah.
but you can only know that in the future. And because we can't see the future, therefore there's no such thing as a mistake.
Yeah.
In a way.
And one more thing that I was going to ask you about, and I don't mean this in a really personal way, is how has this made a difference to your relationships with anybody? I don't mean necessarily personal relationships. I mean, how has it made a difference in relationships, just knowing this?
It's really deepened them, because I'm no longer caught up with the sort of the mundane sort of conflicts, like the stuff where it's like, oh, they disagree with me on this, say just in terms of like kind of friendships or anything. I'm no longer sort of caught up on that, and I'm able to, I think, just love a lot more, because there's so many things that aren't in the way of that. And when it kind of boils down to it, I think the fundamental emotion is love. And that's really allowed me to just sort of connect a lot more. And even in terms of more practically, like I used to have some anxiety about sort of social gatherings and stuff. This has really sort of helped my fear of it in a way, because I no longer know, I now know that actually meeting up with a group of people isn't fundamentally anxious making, or it wouldn't officially make me anxious. And because I know that when I go to sort of events, I might still feel a bit anxious, but I know that that's not always going to be the final outcome. And I know that's it is possible to actually just feel absolutely great and then just have a really relaxed time. And whereas before I didn't realize that was kind of possible. In terms of sort of the dating scene and stuff, it's kind of been a bit sort of annoying now, just because in a sense of because I have this sort of understanding, and I feel a lot more kind of liberated. I think I put up with a lot less crap. So that's meant a lot where sort of guys I've maybe been on dates with, I'm like, no, okay, I'm not going to sort of play along with this in a way, or like I'm very much happy just to sort of I don't let it go in a way. Whereas maybe before I felt like I was entitled to, or I felt like I had to sort of go on this many dates, or I had to be in this kind of type of relationship. Whereas now I'm just like, I'm perfectly happy with myself in a way. And if someone else sort of comes along and makes my life sort of better, then that's great. But I'm perfectly fine just being on my own in the best possible sense.
Yes, I know that feeling, the same. But you said that there was a part of you that was like, oh, why didn't I know this younger? And that's really why we're doing this. That's really why we're doing this whole series of webinars, is because I didn't find out until I was in my 50s, right? So you thought you should have known when you were 15. I thought I should have known too when I was 15. And so that's why we're trying to get this out to young people as much as possible, right? So that they do know as soon as possible. But at the same time, like you said, there are benefits in whatever happens. At first I was like, why didn't I know that sooner? But I learned so many things along the way that I wouldn't have known about other people's experience. If I hadn't known that, maybe I wouldn't even be doing this, right? So
yeah, I think the best result of this is just having a wider conversation with more sort of with everyone, younger people and sort of older people, and people having able to have more of an open conversation about sort of well-being, about our thoughts and feelings, so actually that we become less afraid of them, and that we're able to just sort of share this, and we're able to help people who are stuck, because like I was when I was younger. And even if we're not having direct sort of conversations about this, it's almost contagious. Just because, I mean, personally, I feel a lot calmer. I feel a lot more present as well. So I'm no longer worrying about the future or worrying about the past. I'm much more living in the present. I think that's quite sort of, it can be noticeable. So I think that's the best sort of results, I guess.
Brilliant. Oh, well, that's been a really, really, really great conversation. Thanks, Daniel. And
Thank you.
so anything else that you want to add at this stage?
So nothing. I think I've covered sort of everything I was wanting to.
Yeah, you've covered loads of stuff. It's been really, really good. Yeah, really good. So
I always find I kind of like partially black out in parts.
That's normal.
Sure.
That's normal.
Yeah, it's normal. So I have no idea what I talked about. I'll find out when I listen back to it.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that you could have talked about. I think that was really, really good. Thanks very much.
Good.
So, okay. So I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon. And if anyone wants to ask any questions afterwards, you can post them underneath the video, or you can get in touch with us through the website. And that's at thesecretofeverything.com or on the YouTube channel. So any questions, any comments would be really great. Make sure that you also subscribe to the channel so that we get as many views as possible to get this out to as many people as possible too. So thank you very much, Daniel, and see you again soon.
See you next time. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.